And we want to thank you for joining us. We are continuing to let our family members in from across Metro Lansing, but thank you for being here on time and looking forward to our time here today. And we got the One Love Global family with us, and so we'll do some introductions in a few minutes. But thank you for being with us. All right, as you're coming in, we always have our question. We want to welcome you. And so again, in the chat, we ask that you would share your name and your pronouns. And our opening question, just to get things rocking here, is how are you enjoying this weather? We're having a break in the weather. So fill up the comment section. How are you enjoying the weather? Change your name and add your pronouns. And again, my name is AKA Mordecai, and I will be your moderator for today. Let's see here. I see I've got Angela on. Angela, how are you today?
Doing well. How are you, Mordecai?
I'm doing well. Thank you for hosting this with me, or allowing me to host this with you. I think it's a team affair, don't you?
Definitely a team affair. Absolutely.
I'm glad that we are here with so many people from around Metro Lansing. You have any words of welcome? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I've been pretty quiet, I think, on the last couple of assemblies as the facilitator team has just been handling business. Thank you all for a chance to be on the other side and observe and to really be able to listen, because that's really what this is about what we build together and hearing one another, navigating our understandings of the issues and building our beloved community. So when I see your faces on a Saturday morning like this, I know I'm in the right place, and you are all my beloved. So yay.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Listen, we got to have some JOY joy. We got a lot of stressful things happening in our world. And so we want to make sure we talk about how are you enjoying the weather. Please change your name and add your pronouns if you desire, so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page. Fill up that comment section. Let's go, people. Let's go. Let's go. Let's see who we've got in this chat in the comment section here. I got all kind of comments. Let me go back. Let's see here. I spent an hour in the sun with a friend. I need to get in the sun. I need to get in the sun. So I'm walking, and I love winter. The cold is invigorating. Love the snow. All right, we got a lot of people on the outside. Miss Johnson, New Jersey. The weather is great. Okay, all right. I'm loving the weather right now. I'm waiting for spring. Yes, spring. Come on. We need some budding going on. What else we got? Might see me in places. Yep, I'm transitioning. Let's see here for legal. Da 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 da. The weather is gorgeous, and I love the warmth. Nice to have sun coming in the window. Let's see here. All right, so we thank you for filling up this comment section. If you're just joining us, we're just getting our warm up. Our People's Assembly today is going to be a bit different, and we'll talk a little bit about that, because we started last year having our People's Assemblies, and we're at a critical moment in the work that we have all convened to partake in. So again, our People's Assembly today is being sponsored by One Love Global, community organizing, youth centered, youth empowered, youth education, all with a racial equity lens. And so we've got Liberation PAC, One Love Global, Black Lives Matter Lansing, and Black Lives Matter Allyship of Michigan. And so this People's Assembly is a part of the TRHT process of Metro Lansing. If you do not know what TRHT is, or you want to be a part of the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformational Process for Metro Lansing, please write down the link on your screen, trhtlansing.org, trhtlansing.org. And so let's jump right in. Again, thank you for filling up the comment section. We do have, I am Mordecai, aka Sean Holland, aka Mordecai, and I will be your moderator for today. We have with us our CEO of One Love Global, Angela Waters Austin. She will be presenting today, and some others. So we thank you for being here. Sarah Gettle will be tech support if you need anything going on with your computer screen or whatever. And we also have facilitators who will be taking notes as we move through today's People's Assembly. Now, people often ask, well, what is a People's Assembly? Very simple. It is just where the collective and not the elected determine the outcomes. I know a lot of people say, well, we thought that was government's job. No, that's the community's job. We come together and it's an ongoing process. And this is a dedicated space that's not owned by any organization. We have sponsors, but this space is owned by the community. It is community driven and co-governed, where data is democratized and we make information accessible, especially to those who are the most vulnerable. And we center those directly impacted. We build collective vision and collective priorities together. And so your voice matters, and we hold ourselves and elected officials accountable, and we take action with the intent on delivering results. And so that is, in essence, what the People's Assembly is. Really, we come together and we talk about what does safety look like? What does participatory budgeting look like? What does, community policing look like? We set the agenda and deliver that agenda to our elected officials. We have come to a critical moment in that process. And that's what we want to engage each of you today in that process. Today's People's Assembly, we're going to, obviously we've had our welcomes, we're going to review, we've talked about the People's Assembly, and then we're going to talk about the beloved community and what our priorities are. And we'll have a historical grounding of the civil rights policy and what happened after. We'll look at local policy and process. How do we actually move local policies and legislation forward, obviously on the local level? And then what we are intending, and our goal is to actually come together and we begin to draft a Lansing Breathe Act. A Lansing Breathe Act, which is the civil rights legislation of our time. Now that's where we are. We've talked about participatory budgeting, how a budget is a moral statement of a city, and how there must be a reprioritization of city spending and the funds that we all, obviously pay into through taxes and other means. We've talked about policing. We've talked about healthcare and economy. We talked all those different subjects. Now we need to put it together. And the way we're going to put that together and deliver it is through a Lansing Breathe Act. The Breathe Act, again, is the civil rights legislation of our time. We've had the Civil Rights Act. We've had all the great things that happened in the 60s. And the question that we want to ask is, why are we back here in 2021 with the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing? Why are we back in 2021 talking about the same things that our forefathers talked about and marched for and fought for and died for over the last 400 years? What are we going to do about it? What will be different this time? And so that's our challenge to each of you. Let's take a hard pause, put any questions you might have in the comments section. So let's look at this Breathe Act again. I'm just going to read right off the screen here. This visionary bill divests our taxpayer dollars from brutal and discriminatory policing and invest in a new vision of public safety. A vision that answers the call to defund the police and allows all communities to finally breathe. We're talking about divesting and investing in communities. We are rising up against all of the ways that the criminal legal system has harmed and failed to protect Black communities, the moment requires a solution that fundamentally shifts how we envision community care and invest in our society. History is clear that we cannot achieve genuine safety and liberation until we abandon police, prisons, and all punishment paradigms. So what we want to do now is engage you. We've been talking about this over the last probably 2 or 3 months. We want to engage you now in what does the Lansing Breathe Act, what would that entail? And how will we deliver that? How will we submit that? Who do we hold accountable? And that will be the focus of our People's Assembly on today. Angela, you got anything to say before we dive in?
Oh, I'll have so much to say later that I'll just let people's ears rest right now.
Okay. So thank you again. Now let's breathe. Let's breathe here. Let's see. Your internet connection is unstable. Let's breathe. I want you to envision my thing here. 1 second. Hold on 1 second. I want you to envision this. I want you to just kind of take a deep breath, each of you, those of you that are under the sound of my voice. And I want you to think about what the beloved community feels like, looks like, smells like. What does that mean to you? I know we have on the screen the conditions that create crime and violence are no longer present. Are we just dreaming? Can this be a reality? It is for some. Outcomes can no longer be predicted by race. Racial hierarchy is no longer the norm. Everyone feels welcome, and everyone feels safe. I want you to put in the comment section, you think that's real? How much work do you think it would take to accomplish this? That's what we're working on. This is the ultimate goal, and why we're inviting you into this conversation of putting together and working together to deliver a Lansing Breathe Act. Put in the comment section. When you hear these words and when you read these aspects of the beloved community, do you think that we can accomplish this in Lansing? I want to see who's ready to put your answer. How much work? What will it take? And so I want you to fill up the comment section with that. Now, as we have been meeting, we have identified our priorities. We said we are demanding that we defund the police and invest the money into community organizations. Last People's Assembly, we showed you the data that clearly proved what the community needs and how the needs of the community are grossly underfunded. We talked about number 2, ensuring a livable wages for all to meet basic needs without worry. And 3, divert funds to community programs such as mental health for help and preventative measures. And so these are our priorities, and ironically, these priorities are some of the major pillars that are in the Breathe Act. And so we want to begin to contextualize that for Lansing. Let's stop here. It will take generations to really get there, but we can make significant changes now. And if we don't do the work now, it won't happen later. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. I'm reading the comments from my question. It will work with a shared vision and collaboration. Yep. It seems that the natural state of the mind and heart is love, care, and sustainability for the community. So definitely think it's within reach. I'm glad I'm in the room with people who think like this. Thank you. I'm excited that I'm in the room with people who say, yes, we will. We don't have a choice, but to ensure the work is done. And so we're getting some great comments, absolutely great comments. Now, what I like to do is I want us to think about, I want to play a video. If I can make the transition over here and play this video, and let me know if you cannot see or you cannot hear. I'm going to make a transition and play this video. And I want you to reflect this as this video is playing. I want you to reflect on what's being said at the moment.
My fellow Americans, I am about to sign into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I want to take this occasion to talk to you about what that law means to every American. 188 years ago this week, a small band of valiant men began a long struggle for freedom. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, not only to found a nation, but to forge an ideal of freedom, not only for political independence, but for personal liberty, not only to eliminate foreign rule, but to establish the rule of justice in the affairs of men. That struggle was a turning point in our history. Today, in far corners of distant continents, the ideals of those American patriots still shape the struggles of men who hunger for freedom. This is a proud triumph. Yet those who founded our country knew that freedom would be secure only if each generation fought to renew and enlarge its meaning. From the Minutemen at Concord to the soldiers in Vietnam, each generation has been equal to that trust. Americans of every race and color have died in battle to protect our freedom. Americans of every race and color have worked to build a nation of widening opportunities. Now, our generation of Americans has been called on to continue the unending search for justice within our own borders. We believe that all men are created equal, yet many are denied equal treatment. We believe that all men have certain unalienable rights, yet many Americans do not enjoy those rights. We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty, yet millions are being deprived of those blessings, not because of their own failures, but because of the color of their skin. The reasons are deeply embedded in history and tradition and the nature of man. We can understand without rancor or hate how this all happened, but it cannot continue. Our Constitution, the foundation of our republic, forbids it. The principles of our freedom forbid it. Morality forbids it. And the law I will sign tonight forbids it. That law is the product of months of the most careful debate and discussion. It was proposed more than 1 year ago by our late and beloved President, John F. Kennedy. It received the bipartisan support of more than 2/3 of the members of both the House and the Senate. An overwhelming majority of Republicans, as well as Democrats, voted for it. It has received the thoughtful support of tens of thousands of civic and religious leaders in all parts of this nation. And it is supported by
I want to get some reactions from that portion of the video. Obviously, we don't have time to play all of that video, but I want us to get some reactions. That was in 1967, and 64, 67. And I want you to think about, how did we end up here? What has caused us to be back at this place if we had breakthrough legislation like the Breathe Act. What happened between that point and now that have caused us to gather again around the same issues that LBJ was addressing in the mid 60s? Can somebody put your comments and reactions in the comment section? We're interested because this is the nature of our discussion today, the weight of it. We have to think about what happened in the past, what was missed, what victories, and how do we move forward and not replicate the things that has happened. We don't want the next generation to be back here at this place in 50 years. So please fill up the comment section. The question is, what happened for us to be back at this place discussing the same issue of public safety for our BIPOC citizens across this great nation? We want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. Now, while you're filling out your thoughts, because this is going to require all of us today. This is going to require all of us. Please put your comments in the comment section. I want to talk to you very briefly. Let's just take, this is like a 30,000-foot overview. Obviously, we can't go deep, but I want to just, as you're just thinking and you're processing today, I want to talk to you very briefly, go through history, the two Americas. Who's received reparations and affirmative action? Let's look at the timeline. And let's highlight as you're continuing to, think about that, the weight of that moment and how many people sacrificed their lives and all the things that happened that went into that landmark legislation. And here we are back at this moment having the same discussion about the two Americas. We'll take a look at the Homestead Act of 1862 that did not end until 1976, over 100 years. We're going to look at the GI Bill very quickly, the New Deal of the 30s and beyond, and the Fair Housing Act, Civil Rights legislation of the 1960s. And so when we look at this is just absolutely staggering when we think about this. When we look at the Homestead Act, I'm going to lift this up here a little bit. My screen keeps moving. When we look at the Homestead Act, in July 4th, I think it was, of 1861, Lincoln told the nation the purpose of America's government was to elevate the condition of men, to lift artificial burdens from all shoulders, and to give everyone an unfettered start and fair chance in the race of life. He followed through with the passage of the Homestead Act, and it remained for almost 124 years until it was repealed in 1976. The result of this one piece of legislation was that 10% of the United States' land, or 270 million acres, were claimed and settled. And so in 1862, this landmark, again, piece of legislation granted Americans 160-acre plots of public land for the price of a small filing fee. We know that Indians were removed from their land, and these homesteaders, so to speak, were put in place and settled in land that was already occupied and had been occupied. And so this is the reason why we talk about reparations and we talk about affirmative action. What was this? This legislation, did Black America have an opportunity to be a part of this? Absolutely. Absolutely. There were Black towns, and there's one, I think, still standing in Nicodemus, Kansas, that began to form. But again, as Blacks migrated away from the South, from the dangers of Jim Crow and segregation and white supremacy and racism and lynching, as they moved and tried to take advantage of this legislation, they were met oftentimes with the same forces that presented themselves within the rest of this country. The fate of many of these Black settlers that were excited about this legislation was met, and those towns were faced a major decline as the railroad industry came in and bypassed the black towns. And so what we saw is a decrease in black settlers, even through this legislation. Many of African Americans were denied legal rights under the Homestead Act. Uh, but again, and faced discrimination through this particular legislation. Why? Because white local officials were in charge. So can you imagine? We've got this legislation, and blacks are excited about being a part, and now we have the opportunity to own land, and we get to the West, and what we find are the same forces. The same forces are here. We're still battling. And so we know that even through the Homestead Act, blacks were discriminated and that there was not full participation even within that policy. The railroad industry had a great impact on the Homestead movement, and many African Americans, worked for the railroads and built the Western Railroad for free. Many were arrested and many were charged with all kinds of ridiculous, bogus crimes, and ended up working off local jail sentences by working on chain gangs and working for the railroads. And so once again, we see the layer of white supremacy and racism, even when we have a landmark piece of legislation. What are your reactions as we simply walk through history and we look at what has actually happened? We're visiting history so that we can understand what we need to do so that we don't replicate what has happened. The GI Bill, when we look at the GI Bill, here's a wonderful piece of legislation that while American soldiers were still at war, Congress was thinking about, right? The federal government was thinking about, what are we going to do to increase the middle class? So the government guaranteed loans for veterans who borrowed money to purchase homes and businesses and farms. These loans enabled hordes of people to abandon city life and move to mass-produced cookie-cutter homes in suburbia. This exodus from major cities would help shape America's social, economic, and political landscape for the years to come. When we look here at the GI Bill, African Americans were discriminated even under the GI Bill. And the reason is because of Jim Crow segregation, that even when I would go as an African American service woman or man, as I began to apply for the GI Bill, guess what? Even though college tuition was free, my options were limited. And so once again, we see racism and white supremacy. Even when there's legislation, we see that the power of racism and white supremacy overshadows the good of that bill and discriminates and continues to place Black and brown citizens in harm's way. We don't have time to go into all of it, but the discrimination didn't even end here. Even with education and even in housing, through the GI Bill, local banks in the South refused to lend money to African Americans who were trying to buy homes, even though the government was backing the loan. Now you think about that. And when African Americans ask, now here I've been like my country, I come to get a loan under the GI Bill. No, we can't let you have that. Why? Because you're attempting to buy a home in the white neighborhood, and even though the government is backing the loan, we will not grant you the loan. And so once again, we have the same situation. When we look at the New Deal and during the Great Depression, and it's just so much here, and I want you to think about this. This was, our response to really a capitalistic crisis. It was supposed to create a social safety net, so to speak. Europe's response to their financial crisis was fascism, but here we are coming up with a New Deal. And this New Deal, really, when you get and peel back, there was so much happening politically and culturally at the time. It is just absolutely amazing. But let me give you some facts that during the Depression, unemployment for African Americans was 50%, which was twice the rate of white America. Jim Crow laws were in full swing, which means segregation was widespread. The New Deal allowed whites to have the top pick of the jobs, and also there was a higher wage rate for whites. Black people were assessed a lower wage rate under the New Deal. The statement that you can hear and you can see posted is that blacks were the last ones hired under the New Deal and the first ones fired. The last hired and the first ones fired. The Federal Housing Authority refused to guarantee mortgages for blacks who again tried to buy homes in white areas. These federal responses to African Americans fortified Jim Crow and white supremacy. The Civil Conservation Corps maintained segregated camps. The Social Security Administration excluded those jobs and categories that blacks traditionally filed or filled, especially those in agriculture. So you couldn't even get Social Security benefits because the jobs weren't even listed. Black jobs weren't even listed. Agriculture, 40% of African Americans made their living as sharecroppers and tenant farmers. And under the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, there was an acreage reduction program which hit blacks hard. White farmers, on the other hand, were paid to not till their farms, which drove the prices of farming up and drove black farmers out of business under the New Deal. FDR was battling a rock-solid wall of white supremacy in its own political party. And even when there was anti-lynching legislation that was placed on the table, like defund, he could not support it because of the political clout of white supremacists and racists within politics. Let me take a hard pause here and get some reactions. Angela, what are you thinking as you're hearing me go through this? And I'm almost done.
Oh, well, I've been typing in the chat with everybody else. We have a whole conversation going here that you can't see because you are facilitating. Obviously, I mean, we see the results of it. The history, I mean, history repeats itself. And I don't know if any of you have been watching the Reagan documentary. Like I was so glad to, not glad, but it was so important to see that, to really understand how the ideology of white supremacy is maintained by people who actually aren't in office and people that you don't see. So we target elected officials because they become the figureheads. But as we're seeing right now, we have elected officials and people, our neighbors, family members, who are saying, no, this wasn't just that person. We put that person there and we still believe what we believe no matter who. So removing, as important it was for us to win the vote that we won, we see that it goes so much deeper and that it took decades for America to be prepared to even vote for a white supremacist candidate, a person who was openly and violently explicit about what he believes this country should be, who actually are real Americans, even down to whose vote should count. So it is, I don't know, my mom's not here. I'm looking to see if she's here. Sometimes she'll pop in. But I just remember her talking with her about like what she was feeling and hoping to like be reassured, like, oh no, it was so much worse. And she's just like, oh no. I was born in '68 and she was just like, she expressed just horror and feeling really afraid and uncertain about the time we were in. And so much that I think we all believe that what little gains had been made couldn't be taken. But I think Black America knew that because we had seen it. Our ancestors, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles had seen their towns destroyed, had seen their homes taken. You know, I had to make a hard choice about my home in Detroit because of the predatory lending in Detroit that really compromised, my family's financial well-being. So it persists. It just takes a different form. So I'm glad that we're looking at this from a policy lens, because what we're talking about in the Lansing Breathe Act and defunding police, this is all about policy. And at the end of the day, it's the people who are implementing the policy and also writing new policy to undermine. So Michigan passed a law that says that we can't even name racial impact by race. So there's even consequences for trying to address racial inequities in Michigan, because we have people in Michigan who like things the way that they are.
That's so powerful. I mean, when we think about, our convening today, I think everyone here should just, take a deep breath, because, we have a clear call to action, and that, protest, policy, all of it has to work together, and we've got to do this together, and we're fighting forces. And, when you think about, your mom and your parents, I mean, you think about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that was a major step forward, right? That was a major step forward. The Fair Housing Act of 1968, which literally you think would, all right, that's it. We got this piece of legislation. All things are going to open up. But again, what do we see? We see the same forces that are at work. And, when we talk about this fair housing, this is 1968. And, this prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, sex. And it was a follow-up to the Civil Rights Act. But I want everyone to know that while the Civil Rights Act had been passed, they were still debating this portion, but Dr. King was assassinated. And this was actually passed days after his assassination. I wonder, if he wasn't assassinated, when would that have actually passed? And so when we see this, a growing number of African Americans and Hispanic members of even the armed forces during this time who fought and whose family members died in the Vietnam War, and were having trouble renting or purchasing homes in certain residential areas because of their race and their national origin. So when the Civil Rights Act passed, white America began to feel like the federal government was backing African Americans, which put a strain on the white middle class and the white working class. And so what we see here is that the New Deal of the 1930s continued to evolve, and there was legislation to dismantle and to take things back to where they were. So we know LBJ, we know what happened with Nixon, we know the welfare plan of Clinton. But the other thing is that of Reaganomics. And so since the 1980s, all administrations have been doing everything they can to roll back the New Deal measures. In 1980 to 1988, Reagan was the counter-revolution where whites defected to the GOP, which Lyndon B. Johnson projected. He said that the civil rights legislation is going to cause white rage and a knee-jerk reaction, and white people are going to leave this particular party and go to the GOP, and they actually did. And here was their claim. I want to say this again. And what Reagan was battling was white American workers were faced with stiff competition from now blacks that had opportunities as a result of the Civil Rights Act. White workers felt that the federal government was being unfair to white workers and was backing them and giving them an upper hand and a leg up in the marketplace. And so Reagan becomes one of the major leaders of the counter reform and counterattack to everything that happened in the 1960s. And now we have the war on drugs, the war on crime, the war on this, and the war. So again, we wanted to take a trip through history. There's so much to talk about here, but we wanted to just talk about how legislation has always been met with white rage and a counterattack, and why would it be any different now? So again, we're here. we are here now. So I want to like move on and see. I'm gonna stop share. So Angela, I think I'm gonna pass it to you here as I change the slide. But we also want to get any other reactions. Let's get one or two reactions from those that are with us before we move to the second part of the presentation. What stuck out to you as we went through this section? You can take yourself off mute.
Angela kind of already said it, or she did already say it, that it takes different forms, that it's like the same thing, just you find new ways to make it happen, which is frustrating.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I would say
Really like
also,
what Peter said. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask Peter to share what he put in the comments. And Farron, so many good comments here. If you even just amplify what you put in the comments, that would be great, folks.
yeah, I would say it's interesting also looking at sort of like national legislation as like assuming that that will fix things on every level when really like local politics affect, you know, people's lives the most, and then just like really highlighting just national legislation and then just calling it a day is usually not going to fix things for a lot of people. So that's why it's important, as you know, Ash and Angela were saying in the chat, that like it's important to have, you know, a Breathe Act at like a national and state and local level.
Yeah, that's good.
As a former teacher, I saw again and again the attempt of statewide or even wider legislation to change what was going on in classrooms, and how teachers who were used to doing things the way they did them just kept on doing what they did, basically ignored the mandates that were coming from above. It happens everywhere, and for me, it highlights the importance of our doing our work, human being to human being and heart to heart, because that's where the change will take place, that stays in place, that moves things along. It's nice to have good ideas and notions, but it's relationships that will change what we're doing. That's why I so love what you, Mordecai, and Angela are doing here, because my sense is that's what you're about.
Yeah.
I'd like to add too to the it can't just be national, because like things will happen at the local level. Some of the bills, they specifically legislated and argued for legislation to specifically be worded and set up so that local levels would control the details, so that it would get passed, because the South wanted certain things and the North wanted certain things. So like with the GI Bill specifically, that's exactly how it happened. It was like built that way.
I think it's really important that we're starting to kind of recognize and shed light on some of the people who are uplifted, you know, in American society as heroes, and dismantling that argument in the sense that their policies were actually anti-Black policies, or even with Abe Lincoln, like he didn't really free the slaves to free the slaves, he freed the slaves to punish the South. So I think it's really important that we're now on the stage of like calling those things out, and speaking about like Reagan's, you know, attempts to decimate like real progress when it came to race relations.
Yeah, similarly, to kind of piggyback off what Peter said too, we were talking in the comments a little bit as well, but this piece around like policy, like people are writing policy and then people are like upholding it. And if those people haven't done the work, like Peter said, like if there's not a piece of this person understanding where they sit in the white supremacy hierarchy and all of that, like to me, policy change is not pointless, right? But like it takes the work, and I feel like that is what's missing, or it's not, it's intentional, right? Angela checking me like, yes, actually that was intentional. But like to me, like there's a piece of, in order to actually have the change, policy and practice both in place, but then all the people that are making it and are putting it into practice are also doing the work. And so that they, it's personal. I don't know, that's all.
Yes, Sarah, and I want to lift up Lolita. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Lolita Johnson. The policies didn't lead to shared vision, behavioral change, and ongoing support to take the legislation to the next level. And it was intentional, as Sarah just pointed out, and that there's lack of accountability for those with a power and authority to make the sustainable change. Like, we give a pass to people to cause harm to folks in their community, and at the local level, where are those systems of accountability to actually enforce and to ensure that that the legislation actually delivers what it promised? But I keep hearing relationships. And so this idea that people are knowingly making these decisions is hard to fathom. Like, we want to believe that if we just appeal to people's hearts and minds, that they're going to do the right thing. I mean, clearly, like, us being in relationship here is allowing us to work together. What do we do when people are adamant in their belief and that a racial hierarchy is what America was always intended, and that they believe that they were destined by religion or whatever other belief that they are the chosen and that they are designed to rule others? How do we build what we need for all of us when we know that that's a reality that some people have? Like, that's their reality, that's their truth. Nobody has the answer to that? I thought we were about to wrap this up.
In my personal life, I separated myself from my family that thought that way, because they also did other things to me specifically. But like, at the end of the day, the core belief that was the problem was that they think that, and it was affecting my ability to be effective at changing it. So I don't know what to do, because I mean, at a personal level, I've already cut off relationship with people that are like that. So what do we do when it's at a local or national level? I don't know.
I think that there are two things that are needed. One of them, to sort of sidestep the battering ram mentality that we've gotten into, trying to bash through people's ideologies and defenses to get them to see our point of view. I think we have to undo that through a kind of radical empathy, really trying to understand what it is they experience and why it is they experience it. But that's not enough. That's just being nice. I think the other is, at the same time, really radically and firmly standing for what we know to be true and what we believe and what kind of future it is that we want to build. I think that especially, standing for the future that we want to build, and that both of those have to be in place if dialogue is going to move along anywhere. So I've just solved the problem. That's a joke.
Hi, everyone. This is Lolita. I do think that, we're not going to be able to change the way everyone, as far as everyone's belief system, but focusing on those who you can move and those who are willing to work to resolve the issues, turning the energy in that direction. Because if you go into these battles with confrontation, right, you never know where they'll lead. So I would say, go for the low-hanging fruit. People who are on one accord with your vision and your ideas. Because sometimes what you find is, though, you continue doing what you're doing, and people see what you're doing, and then they'll catch up to you later in some instances.
Yeah, one of the things that I like to piggyback on what you're saying is that there was a tremendous amount of community organizing that came out of each one of these phases that moved major initiative forward for the next generation. And so we let us not again underestimate the power that we have in coalition. Our voices matter. And so, you get the auto workers, the rubber workers, you get, the unions, coming out of that time. So I want to play this video, and then I'm going to pass it over back to Angela for our latter part of our discussions. But this video is about the GREED Act and then I'm going to pass it back to you, Angela. Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks, Anna.
So why are we here again? Why do we need this? That's our discussion today.
Local Breathe, very, very similar to the State Breathe Act. You can see the same 4 sections from Federal Breathe, but these are the ways that we saw these policies as being most implementable on the local level. And so again, we're not going to spend time on every single one of these pieces because we don't want your eyes to completely glaze over. But there were a couple of pieces that I wanted to uplift from Section 1 and Section 2 of Local Breathe. And then Lily's going to talk a little bit about some of the educational provisions, and then more broadly, some of the other invest components. So one thing to uplift from the first section of the Local Breathe Act is this idea of a Breathe Community Declaration. And so this is really building on what we said originally about these kinds of resolutions to support the Federal Breathe Act. But the first thing in a Breathe Community Declaration would be to state support for the federal bill. Then the second thing that would be part of this declaration would be to commit to setting up a community-led community safety agency. And just one thing to really highlight about what this community safety agency would look like is that there would be a commission, which would be comprised of not only people from the community, but also people who have been directly impacted or are currently working as advocates and grassroots organizers on these dismantling mass incarceration issues. And this commission would ultimately be the decision maker. So they would have a ton of very concrete powers, including as part of this declaration, the ability to actually veto what the police department's budget is. So, right, so let's say the police department was requesting a budget increase or something along those lines, then the community safety agency would actually have the ability to veto that. Now we know that's gonna be a tough sell, right? But again, we're trying to dream big and imagine like what this dream world actually looks like. Another thing that's part of this new infrastructure is that communities would have to allocate at least 20% of their local funds, plus the money that is saved as they shrink their local criminal legal systems, to put back into these non-carceral, non-punitive interventions that the community safety agency would be investing in. And for those who are out in California, you might recognize that's very similar to the model that was recently enacted in Los Angeles. And so that's part of the inspiration for that particular piece. So another thing, and the Breathe Community Declaration has more components than this, but these are just the ones that I was lifting up, where that, you know, as I mentioned, there would be the budget review from the Community Safety Agency, but also part of this declaration would be actually just setting community-specific goals in terms of both reducing the funding that is going to the criminal legal system, but then also some pretty concrete changes around reducing criminal legal contact. There would also be goals around criminalization of poverty, around reducing charges at the local level. And all of these sorts of goals would be things that advocates in the community would decide, and they would be the ones who then write that into what their Breathe Community Declaration looks like. So flipping then over to the second section. So that particular section is where at the local level, we'd be really building out this non-carceral infrastructure. And so as mentioned in the last slide, the funding for this agency would be at least 20% of local revenue. And what the responsibilities would be is, number one, understanding the needs in the local community that are centered in the systemic reasons that criminal legal involvement oftentimes occurs. So for example, affordable housing, mental health, all like lack of quality infrastructure and public transportation, right? But really doing this in-depth needs assessment and then designing a safety plan that is going to help address those needs. And so you'll recognize all of this when we're talking about the Federal Breathe Act, but this is really just where the rubber hits the road at the local level for what we were talking about in Section 2 of the Federal Breathe Act. And I actually think that I hit most of the things on this slide, but again, happy to go into depth on any of these other pieces. All right, and with that, I will turn it to your this is the final time we are flipping between people, to Lily to talk now about some other aspects of local.
Yeah, sure. So this next section of Breathe mirrors Section 3 of the Federal Breathe Act. So this includes holistic investments and also equity-focused reforms to advance public safety across 5 areas. So that's education, health, environmental justice, economic security, and housing. So we're taking a lot of the equity-focused reforms that we were incentivizing in Section 3 of the Federal Breathe Act and just implementing those directly here. So we wanted to give you a taste of just one of the sections so you can get a sense of what Local Breathe is trying to accomplish. So we thought we'd give you an overview of our local education justice section. So this includes something we're calling a safe haven school district declaration. So essentially any local school district within the local jurisdiction would be required to commit to becoming a safe haven school district. So that means taking concrete steps to decriminalize schools, institute restorative justice practices, meet students' basic needs, among a few other things like ensuring there's really robust community engagement. Next, the local education justice bill would establish a local office, which would be spearheading initiatives related to anti-racism within the school district, instituting Black and ethnic studies programs and curricula, and also just generally revamping curricula across the school to make sure that it's, meeting the values of this kind of safe haven school district. Next, we asked the locality to establish youth achievement centers to ensure that all students have the academic, social, material, and cultural supports that they need to thrive through comprehensive wraparound services. Next, we include a local scholarship program for higher education that's available to all resident students. And finally, we include a local program for universal and free early childhood education and pre-K for all residents. So that's just a quick kind of taste of the education justice elements of Local Breathe.
Local Breathe, very, very similar to the state.
So we're going to explore now the Local Breathe Act and have our explorer time. Now, Angela, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us further.
Thank you, Mordecai. There's a section 4, but I don't think is that there?
I didn't see it. I think it cut off.
Okay, yeah. So there's a section 4, but what we're going to do now is invite you to get to a device that you can actually explore what you just saw. We have the template to use to build from. And so as you can see, this is a longer video, which we'll share out like we do everything else. So you'll be able to actually watch the full video and see the explanation of the Federal Breathe Act as well as the State Breathe Act. And before we dive into our Lansing Breathe Act template, I want to share some good news and explain why I am sitting with this Black Lives Matter Michigan logo behind us. So since we last met, like a few amazing things have happened. Let's see, we were nominated, Black Lives Matter was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. We just this past week distributed $3 million to families while we waited for the American Rescue Act to be at least passed in the House anyway. And we actually secured our sponsors, our community champions, I should say, for a Michigan Breathe Act. So I think we shared that Representative Sarah Anthony was our Lansing champion and working to help us build legislative champions to move that forward internally. And so Senator Marshall Bullock out of Detroit, has joined her as our legislative champion, and we're using the language champion because we haven't introduced anything yet, so they're not sponsors yet. But what they're doing is using their resources and tools to research what policies have already been passed, like what bills have already been passed, what legislation is currently in draft form, what's in blueback status, as they call it, so that we can actually see who actually is aligned with us. Who is that coalition of the willing legislators that we can invite to sponsor their legislation as a part of a Michigan Breathe Act, so that we're actually, like all of those links that you saw, that we actually have bills that are moving in each of those areas that actually come together for a Michigan Breathe Act. So we're going to build this at the state level in the same way, from the bottom up of what we actually need. And I'm excited about our legislative champions, but I'm more excited about our community champions. So we talked about how the Federal Breathe Act has really been grassroots, and so it has two congressional champions, Rashida Tlaib out of Detroit and Representative Ayanna Presley at the federal level. And then I think the last I heard was like over 250,000 people like us and organizations have signed on as community co-sponsors. And so that's how we're building the coalition of the willing at the federal level. And we have just begun to do that work at the state level. And this week, Mayor Karen Weaver from Flint, and for those of you that don't know, Flint is our sister city. Mayor Verge Bonero signed a sister city resolution with Mayor Weaver. And that's actually how I got to Flint. He said, go help her. And I did. And 3-4 years later now, she has agreed to be one of our community champions. Her counterpart as a community co-champion was actually her advisor for public health for Flint. She's actually from Saginaw, but like I went to Flint to help out, Dr. Pamela Pugh went to Flint to help out to build the recovery for Flint. And actually rebuild the entire Flint government because the emergency law had completely gutted it. When we went into City Hall, like there weren't desks or chairs or people or anything. So we literally had to rebuild the entire infrastructure for Flint's government. And I was just honored to be on her capacity team to help coordinate that effort. So we have long-standing relationships. Dr. Pamela Pugh, those of you may remember, we came together to do a call to action to Governor Whitmer to pass a resolution declaring racism a public health pandemic, which she did. So Dr. Pugh delivers, just like Mayor Weaver delivers. Trust Black women, hashtag. And so for those of you who may not know this, Dr. Pamela Pugh was also the vice president of Michigan's Board of Education. So when we talk about educational justice, so she grasped, like the two of them together, they're both doctors. They have letters behind their names. And so Dr. Weaver is background, and I think doctorate is in social work and human services. So she is very much all about the people, and that's the orientation she brought into her role as mayor, is putting the people first. Dr. Pugh brings a public health and an environmental justice frame into the work. So as Mordecai has said, that, you know, our big 3 E's, education, economy, and environment. And health is across all of them. And our goal is to make sure that whatever policies that we write at the state level and at the local level, that they have a racial equity lens, that they have a health equity lens, and that we're really paying attention to the implementation of it, which is what I want to get into now, is what does that actually look like? Can I pause here and just ask what your thoughts were on the Community Safety Agency?
I love that they have veto power over police budgets.
Yeah, that's huge. We have really, like, we started down the pathway of starting a community review board and all of that here, and we brought in a judge from a state that had probably the most robust civilian review board. And she was really honest about, you know, without subpoena power, without veto power, it's just another meeting. It makes people feel good and it gives them a voice, but it does not shift power. So we didn't move forward with it. Like, we could have had one here very easily, but it would not have had the weight that it really needs to have. Any other comments about or questions about what you saw? Because we're actually going to dive into that document next. Okay, so what I'm doing is copying and pasting a link that, yep, let me go ahead and change the settings on this so you don't have to like ask for permission. Let me do that first. Okay, so I'm dropping or you already got the link, so you should be able to access the document. Can you give me a thumbs up or wave your hand when you've got the document in front of you? And I'm gonna share my screen. But what I want you to do is, I'm gonna share my screen, but what I want you to do is take a few minutes and just spend some time with it. Just get familiar with the layout of it. The Federal Breathe Act is there, the state is there. And then when you get to the local, we'll come back and walk through it together. Sound good? Yay, heads nodding, okay. Quick feedback. How are you feeling about the document now that you've had a chance to click in it a little bit? Just some reactions to it.
Loving section 3. I only got through these education and a little bit of the health recommendations, and they're awesome. It's like everything that I want in those 2 areas, which are I care about those areas a lot. So yeah, that was it's thorough.
Great, and thank you, Zach. Zach is looking in the chat for your questions. We may not have a chance to get everything, but Zach is going to track our questions. And before we close out, we'll do a read through and make sure we gather your questions so that we can factor them into planning for the next session, I should say. Oh, we've got a few comments in the chat. Let's do those. Let's see, Ash Toth, how do we define military grade weaponry? You didn't see it in the key definitions page, and might be ineffective if we don't define what it is we're banning. Really, really good point. Like calling a thing and being as specific as possible, because we see that gray area and fuzziness can easily be interpreted by folks to mean whatever they want it to mean. Do you want to expand on that, Ash? Did I capture that?
Yeah, pretty much. That's like all I was saying. Pretty much. Yeah, like basically, like yeah, if you don't specify what it is you're banning, that can be interpreted like however the people in power want it to be interpreted. And kind of like I was thinking of like how Clinton's assault weapon ban didn't really do much because they didn't really specify what an assault weapon was, and yeah, I figured it would be best specify what we're banning exactly for police to have to make it more effective and harder and give them less like loopholes and wiggle room.
Thank you, Ash. Yes. Is it also suggesting banning body cams? Body cams haven't served us. They've increased police budgets and actually been used more for surveillance than they actually have been for holding police accountable, which is what they were intended for. Rachel says she loves that commissions have explicit requirements for who is on the commission and that they're compensated. Yes, labor is for real. We pay city council members. Why wouldn't we pay our folks to serve in this capacity? I love voting for jailed individuals too, Anna. And right now, folks that are actually on pretrial detention can vote. If you haven't been convicted, you can vote. Unfortunately, we don't have any systems in place to really make that happen. So it takes community organizers who actually go and make that happen. And it's generally formerly incarcerated people who commit to do that labor for us. Local Green New Deal Task Force. Yeah. That's that economy part. I'm learning. That wasn't even like on my personal agenda, but I'm excited, and excited to say that like the Flint, we chose to kind of hone in on because they represent what we could all become, with decades of racial inequity and having our local democracy and our local power completely taken by the state. And I know this group would never allow that to happen in Lansing, but we definitely want to learn all the lessons we can learn from Flint, not just about the crisis, but also the recovery. Oh, Sarah, yes, hopeful. I'm glad that this makes you feel hopeful. More community members are at the table, a lot of potential to improve health outcomes. Yeah. Section 3, violence reduction and gender justice, including advocacy and prevention services related to sexual assault, harassment, and other violence. Absolutely, because one of the first things that people try to use against us is, oh, what about rape victims? It's one of the very first things. What about domestic violence? And as a survivor, I'm just going to tell you that police don't keep me safe. The one time that I did call for assistance, the police stood there while a man spit in my face and refused to make him leave the dwelling. So that's my experience as a survivor with police. And I've never shared that publicly, so thank you for making me feel safe enough to share it. Nathan, yes, loving the environmental justice and climate justice section. Yeah. Converting our built structure to safer net zero buildings. This is
I read in the part 2 a bunch, and I love how much care was taken in the language to be like, you can tell how much effort was put into uplifting the people who are just always completely ignored, and talking about like how 50% of the safety commission has to be comprised of people who are like either past incarcerated or like use drugs, who have been homeless before. And it's just the exact opposite of the way that that power structure is built right now. And I just feel like it's like proactive accountability almost, because you know that the folks who, if you could really comprise the people making those decisions of those people, like they wouldn't even be enacting policy that would be harmful for themselves to begin with. It wouldn't even be this whole cycle of like reacting to harm after it's caused and then trying to fix it after the fact. It would, it's putting them at the lead of that instead.
Absolutely. Yeah, which I mean kind of raises a question and a challenge for us in this group. We talked about it on the last call is, I mean, our group is fairly diverse. I think it's fairly representative of our region. Is it actually representative of the experiences as defined by what we actually want to see in our community safety agency? So one of the challenges to us is to think about who we're going to bring into this space with us. I mean, if we each brought even one person to the next session that can bring a different voice and perspective to those areas where we know that we're going to need people who are directly impacted to lead, and for us to get to build the kind of relationships where we would have confidence saying, yes, we want you on that agency. Yes, we want you on that commission, because we want to make sure that we are building a commission that really represents, as Zach just said, and I think I just saw that, Ash, radical visibility, like absolutely. We have the opportunity to build a commission unlike any we've ever seen in this community, and we've seen a whole lot of commissions. And sometimes even they look really diverse. They look physically diverse, but ideologically, and in terms of life experience and class and just even outlook and understanding of what the issues are, they're pretty homogeneous, and they pretty much maintain the hierarchy. So we have a chance to disrupt that and to build what we really want. That's what excites me the most. So anybody else want to chime in about what you saw any questions, so that we can make sure that Zach is able to document questions? Yes, Erica, diversity is not equity. That's absolutely right. And Erica wants to be on all the commissions. I nominate Erica for all the commissions. Ton. Love the education and community sections, Farron. Yeah, me too. Yeah. Thank you all. Yeah, so this is great. And how many of you feeling like this is a whole lot of work? Yes. Yep, I see heads nodding. And are we up for it? Are we up for the work? Yes, heads nodding excitedly. Yes, we are up for the work. And we can bring other people into the work so that it's a lighter lift for all of us. And there's a place for everyone in Lansing People's Assembly. This is not a private exclusive group. Right now we need people in Zoom. And so, you know, we can't all be in the physical room together, but we can expand this group as large as we need it to be until we can actually get in the same room together. And as you can see, because there is so much work, we're going to have to really think about how we want to organize ourselves to get it done. So we wanted to spend time in the full group session today rather than diving into breakout groups. So we can actually think about, one, how do we actually get this done? So if we had a perfect Breathe Act, if we went through and we filled in all the blanks, how would we actually get it done? Do we understand the process well enough to pass legislation, even in our own community? Because most of us, we vote, and then we trust those folks to go make it happen. This is us making it happen. Do we know what that looks like? Do we have any idea what it takes to pass a law? And is there anything even in our skeleton for the Breathe Act that we know is going to require us to take a look at Lansing's charter? Does anybody actually have the answers to those questions? Yeah, why is government process such a mystery? Why don't we know these things?
Angela?
Yes.
Just recently working with Commissioner Mary Alice Adams, City of Benton Harbor. As the legislative chair before I was thrown off, I learned a lot with our ordinance and the manner in which things become law. A lot of it has, the clerk has a lot of work to do. It actually is on that committee's chair, that committee itself, legislatively has to put that resolution together in order for it to become an ordinance for something like that to even be put on the ballot. And that's where it has to take place. And actually, it can be done for Michigan as a whole if it goes on the ballot. And it can just bypass locally. And I guess that's the distinction that I wanted, as opposed to doing something locally. Are we doing it statewide? But I remember having broad conversation about the cannabis ordinance that was coming forth. And all I had was to have the 5 votes amongst the 9 commissioners. And I got some pushback from county sheriff as well as prosecutor, but I pushed it. I pushed it because it was something that the people wanted. And it became law locally, and now it's gone, spread like wildfire.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams, and just to distinguish, because we're talking about how government works, and Benton Harbor was actually under emergency management and has had to fight to keep its one high school open for students. But it's important to note that like we have a strong mayor government, Benton Harbor has a city manager and a strong commission. So Commissioner Adams actually sits in a seat of power that's different than our city council.
It helps too, it helps, but we are a home rule city. And we, I still haven't figured out totally what that means, but it has quite a bit of weight when you have those 5 other votes of security. And that's where politics are played. And I hate it. I hate it, but sometimes for the betterment, you have to play the politic game for things to come into fruition.
Thank you for sharing your insights as a person who has stepped up to lead on the inside in Benton Harbor, which is not an easy thing to do. Checking the chat here. Question from Anna Fisher. How did you change the city charter?
I think I have the answer to that. Anybody feel free to correct me, but I read into it. I believe you can bring, city council can either bring a measure to do that, which would probably be the difficult way to do that right now, but you can also bring a petition with at least 5% of the registered voters in Lansing's electorate, and then that would force a vote on it on the next election. It would have to pass by a simple majority.
If I may add, some people don't pay attention to what's going on, which is why a lot of things happen, and we're wondering what happened because we weren't a part of. But there's some postings, some public notices that must go out from the city clerk's office in a certain amount of time when an ordinance needs to be changed or what have you. But the public has got to have the right to participate, and they have a certain amount of time to do that, and they can do it via, well, due to COVID, email or person or virtually now, I'm sure, or a handwritten letter, their agreement or disagreement, and it has to count.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, we actually had reached out to City Clerk Chris Wolf to see if he could be here to answer some of these questions for us. Did not get a response back for that. But I see lots of comments in the question in the chat about, like, it's designed to confuse us and overwhelm us. There's a reason that we don't know the answer because we're pretty bright punch here and we don't know. So that means that it is not as accessible or, as easy for people to pick up as we might be expected to. And also the need to learn. So yes, some of us are good at research and investigating. I'm ready. Yes, Sarah. Training those who are interested in understanding the process. Yep, we got to do that work. Like, we think we can just dive in and start filling in the blanks. Like, there's some steps that we need to put in place for that to happen. So I'm glad that we're naming that, because I was feeling the same thing. Like, you mean you're not just going to hand us what we need and we can just turn it in and it's done? Okay, roll up our sleeves here. How do we make policy and legislative processes accessible and collaborative? Absolutely. Like, these are all good questions, and your questions are actually going to help us frame how we move forward from here. So I'm hearing that there's some things that we need to learn. Because I was thinking, like, we could get on here today and click around and try to look at the city charter and see what we could figure out. And that's literally what we're being expected to do. Anytime a decision is made, because we don't know how it works, we have to go and try to figure it out for ourselves. Ash Toff says a big part of it is language, and there's a language barrier trying to read through bills. Yes, it is intentionally designed, and every little word makes a difference. Just like you pointed out, if we don't specifically name what we mean by military grade weapons, it could be interpreted as assault rifles, or, or tanks. We need to be really clear about what we think military grade weapons means. We have young people who are excited and willing to get to work. Yes, Teresa would, but we need to educate them and help them understand their inherent power. Like, that's a whole job in itself. Like, getting young people involved in this and interested and doing it in a way that's engaging is going to be a different approach. And we need people that have the expertise and the relationships. As Peter said, it takes relationships to do this work. 5% of Lansing's electorate to sign a petition, then it goes to the voters at the next election. That's a question from Anna. Like if this became a ballot measure, I was talking to a friend at ACLU yesterday and getting a better understanding of how they use just even the threat of litigation to make things happen, and what it actually takes to make these type of changes. So Zach has posted in charter amendments, the process for charter amendment. Zach, do you want to talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, basically it says that in order to be adopted, they have to be voted by a simple majority, which especially during like smaller elections can be, I mean, that can be a difference of like 50 or 100 people. And they can be brought by petition, which in a different subsection, it references how initiatives and petitions can be brought. And one of those ways is that petitions must be signed by a number of city electors equivalent to at least 5% of the registered electors in the city. So I don't know off the top of my head how many registered electors there are in the city, but 5% of those, you'd submit a petition with the amendment on there, and then that would be enough to place it on the next ballot.
All right. So that process is a whole job in of itself. So when we think about organizing and the kind of like working groups and teams that we need to build, we're getting a sense of what this lift is going to look like. And people who have done this really well, like I think about Voters Not Politicians and the amazing work that went into transforming our voter laws in Michigan, which if we did not have those laws, where would we be right now? So thank you for everyone who has been involved in that work. But there has been, we've got some wins that we can learn from. So maybe we want to invite some of the folks who worked on those things to, you know, share some lessons learned and help us shorten our learning curve and maybe not make some bigger errors. Maybe they can help us avoid some landmines as we go. Learn to navigate politically to get bill passed. Yes, Lolita. Yeah, it is political. As much as we don't want to deal with the politics of it, I remember saying, I love policy, I just don't want to get involved in politics. That was so cute of me 20 years ago. It's just not realistic. Oh, Farron, you have an idea how to do that with youth? Yes. All right, Youth Squad. Can we get number of registered voters? Oh, so we can find out what 5% of that is? Yeah, now that's fairly easy. That part is fairly easy to do. I can math a little bit, so we're good. If we have a package of charter amendments, I wonder if it needs to be separate petitions per each, or just one, or if they're somehow tied at the local level. That's a good question. That is a very good question, because, you know, we're talking about piecing things together at the state level into a package, which is a little bit more clear, and we're working with legislators that know how to do that and are willing to do that. So this actually makes me question, do we need Lansing champions? Do we need Lansing legislative champions who are willing to help us from the inside? And if we did, who would those champions be? You got a little bit of a challenge there. Might need some former council members and former elected officials, former legislators to help us with that. City clerk's job is to make this as accessible to us as we ask of him. So one of the things that we can do is actually ask people to do the job that we pay them to do. Let's see. Lots of good comments and questions here. Erica, just 64% of registered Ingham County voters cast a ballot Tuesday. Oh, so that's 68%. That's phenomenal. 68% of registered Ingham County voters cast a ballot. That's how we did it, y'all. Let's see. Physically getting the signatures is a whole thing as well. Yeah, especially during a pandemic. Are we allowed to gather signatures electronically? That is a really good question. So over 200,000 registered voters in Eaton County. Judge allowed digital ones in this case. Great. So there's some precedent that digital signatures have been allowed. That's great. See, we just learned a whole lot. Like y'all just diving right in and like filling in the blanks already. So this is actually the energy that we need. Yeah, Commissioner, I see people out there with petitions. Yep. So Sarah has mathed for us, and that's 10,750 signatures. 10,720, Zach says. 5%, Erica. Yeah, between the math, let's do an average, and then that'll be it. I love it. Yeah, we have the right people. That's what this says to me. Like we have the right people to dive into this work. So we've got 15 minutes left. And I'm just gonna like share the screen here because we need to talk about how we're gonna get this done. And one idea is that we organize teams around the 4 sections. You've clicked through them, you see what's in there. Are you feeling like you could handle a section? Do we want to organize and focus on section by section together? And open to suggestions. How do we want to organize? How do we want to eat this elephant? I'm sorry, elephant, we don't want to eat you.
I feel like, at least for me, each section is so in depth that it would be easier for me to have like a section to really get like a great understanding around, and it would be a little bit tougher to work through the entire thing unless we were going to do it like, you know, piece by piece. But I mean, you know, my hope is that we could like jump on all of it at the same time somehow.
I see heads nodding. Jump in.
I was gonna say, I agree. While skimming it, I was like, on every section, you know, I'm like, oh, I want to be on that. But like, the truth is that I feel like if I could take something that I'm stronger in and use my expertise there, and then like let other people do their thing, that we would all then, and I'm with Zach, like I could really dive into a section and trust that other people would be doing the same.
Yeah, how's that feeling for folks? Anybody have a different idea? Sections, groups, down for education. All right, people are signing up for the groups they want already. In fact, that was actually how we wanted to move through this, is, you know, for you to have enough sense of what's in the sections, for you to be able to drop the team that you want to be on in the chat. So if you just, the number, if you would drop the number of the section that you want to dive into, and then we'll figure out what it looks like from there so that we can think about where we might need to invite some more folks to get into teams.
Angela, I would add that the TRHT working groups, they, the BREATHE Act will be a part of their, you know, will be within their lens as well. So we've got a whole nother group that's being added to this as well, that's looking at the BREATHE Act.
Okay, Rachel,
I
you
also think for
6, what section of 5 and 6 are you? Is that in?
Oh, maybe I'm looking at the local BREATHE roadmap. Am I looking at the wrong spot?
No, you're looking at the right thing. There's like 4 big sections, and then once you click in, it expands.
Part 5 and 6, section 3.
Okay, section 3. Lots of energy for section 3. All right. And that's interesting. Representative Anthony called it. She felt like that's where the energy was going to be, and where she's most passionate, and where she's probably going to put her stamp on it with some sponsored legislation. Local environment justice, not sure what number that was. Okay. Ash Talks asked where, you know what, let me go ahead and share my screen so that we can be looking at sections. That might be helpful. Or you can do the same. Yeah, I love, it's like I looked at the 4 boxes and I was just like, oh, we got this. And then I kept clicking and clicking, and it was like one of those little Russian doll things that opens up a million times. Yeah, so the 4 parts, maybe that's it. So there's the 4 parts, and then there's the sections within. So even within a part, we're probably going to need more capacity than we have, but let's just start with who we have and we'll see where it goes from there. And then maybe one of the things that we can think about once we kind of form our teams is who else we need on our team, so that we can be really strategic in sharing this great work with people in ways that make them want to get involved. I can't see the chat. So are you finding the section, the part that you want to dive into? So let's deal with parts. Let's do the 4 parts. Which of the 4 parts do you want to dive into? And then when we come back together, or actually it's probably going to happen between now and then, when we have our next facilitation section, our facilitation team is going to need to think about how we want to structure the next meeting so that we can do that work inside of the parts and the sections. So part 1, divesting and ending criminal legal harm. Part 2, investing in new approaches to community safety. Part 3, investing in healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities for all people. And part 4, holding officials accountable and enhancing self-determination of Black communities. And glad that we did this part 4. So those of you who are involved in TRHT, the Federal Breathe Act team has actually adopted the TRHT Commission. That's already a sponsored federal bill. It's being sponsored by Representative Barbara Lee, so you can actually track it. And the Breathe Act has adopted the TRHT Commission as our model, as one of the ways that we actually want to build a sustainable structure for accountability. And I'm excited to share that Tajmika Torak from Firecracker Foundation and us over at One Love Global and BLM have been convening a group of BIPOC people to envision what a racial equity accountability process might look like. So we've already started to do a little bit of work on on part 4 on holding officials accountable. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat because I can't see anything. Okay, we're getting the parts. 9 minutes left. Oh, Jordan. All right. Accountability. Yeah. So let's just open it up for questions and comments. We've got just a few minutes left, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Mordecai to close us out. Did we miss anything in the chat, Zach, as you're taking notes? Because it's gotten kind of far down there.
There were a couple up earlier. You mentioned the thing about liking seeing Grand Legend, Holton Mason challenging the status quo, and Ashtoth asked how so, but I can send them some articles because I think I know what you're talking about there. Mary Alice Adams asked a while ago too, so I'm thinking what part should community financial institutions that are to put back into communities yearly, part to pay, I think she asked. Should they be held accountable? I think the rest of them, you got, Jordan asked, can we tie bar things at the state? You can tie bar things at the state, but can you do that at the local level? Which I think was just tying into the idea of whether we could package amendments together if they had to be petitioned separately. And Lolita asked if they could sign up for a group even though they're an NJ.
As in New Jersey? Yes.
I'm guessing.
Not only can't you, you can be on a team here, but you can start your own and use these tools in your own community. Yeah, in fact, soon there will be a Defund the Police website that is being collaborated on by a bunch of organizations, and BLM is one of the financial partners to help get it going. But there will be a website where you can see all of the work that's being done across the country in other communities, to see the progress that other communities have had, lessons learned. And our work will be featured there too as we move forward. So we will have a chance to learn from other communities and share with other communities as well. The website feels a little bit academic, but you know, we're academic folks. So, but the goal is to get it as user-friendly as possible, so that people can get really rich information and to see what the packages are looking like in other communities, because you can see what Illinois looks like right now, and I'm told that it's a win, but not a model, and that a lot of compromise was made at the political level, and things ended up getting attached into the Illinois Breathe Act that actually is contradictory and undermines some of the progress that folks wanted to make. So those are the kind of things that we can learn from other communities as we build. Where do we really want to, where can we afford to compromise, and where do we simply need to draw a line to make sure that we don't end up with something that maintains the power structure as it is. People are fine moving money around. We even heard that on Lansing City Council. Well, yeah, let's deal with the budget stuff. We don't want to deal with the policy stuff. Let's see if we can figure out how to move money to invest in some of these things without actually divesting from the system that actually is causing the harm. And those are the kind of compromises that we just simply can't afford to make. All right, so I see y'all landing. Oh, please, Sarah, go ahead.
Just a quick, there's some comments in the chat, and also now I'm a little bit confused about a local versus federal and parts versus sections. And I want to make sure that I'm answering correctly on the roadmap.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
So I was looking at the 4 sections, like part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and now like I'm looking at Gray's comment, like interested in part 4 and local, but not 4 and federal. And so I just don't know if I don't know if I'm looking at something different.
I'm sorry, that's my fault. I'm on the wrong sheet screen. Let me scroll down. The names of the sections are still the same, but the parts when you get in. So ours, for the Local Breathe Act, they're called sections and parts, and that's not helpful to us to change the language. I'll try to tell the folks that put that together that confused us a little bit. So yes, we should be looking at the Local Breathe roadmap. Let me go back to that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had the federal one up on the screen, so that wasn't helpful. So the Local Breathe roadmap are the 4 sections, and the headings are exactly the same. So if you landed on the heading that you wanted, it's good. The headings are consistent at all 4 levels, just so that we can do better alignment and to make it easier to find that alignment across the state and federal as well.
Thank you for clarifying.
Absolutely. Well, my apologies for confusing you. Anything else in the chat there? Okay, so please get your teams in here. And if you're still thinking about it, you can please feel free to email us if you need to take a closer look at it. Otherwise, we're going to use the teams that you chose to organize. So for those of you who are on the facilitation team, we'll be organizing the next meeting to think about how we want to structure this based on the teams that folks signed up for. Erica, just to clarify then, section 3, parts 3 and 4. All right.
I had said to Jordan, and I can help them with this, and maybe we send out like the follow-up email. Maybe we create just like a Google survey that actually has the titles of the sections, and people like select which one, so that there's more clarity around that. And then Jordan also mentioned that might be a good way to engage folks outside of the who are present here right now. So
absolutely, because we have I think a whole list of hundreds of people that signed up initially, and as you can see, we're getting to a small group, but that's how it always is. But we can certainly, like, surveys allow us to get more information in, so we could even get feedback from the broader community on priorities that way too. And yeah, great idea. Ash Toth, can I volunteer to help with this? Yeah, we don't say no to volunteers. A survey would be helpful. Thank you, Teresa. Okay, yep. Support for a survey. Looks like that's a good next step. Awesome. Okay, yeah, so we're gonna spend a little bit more time on the organizing part of it, just because people need to have a chance to spend some time with this, and we're gonna take as much time with it as we need. We know that we've got an election coming up, and there's some logic to waiting until after that, and some logic for doing things before then. So it's just a matter of determining what our timeline is going to be, so we know the capacity that we need. Thank you all for that, and back to you, Mordecai.
Hey, just got thank you everyone for your participation, and just save the dates on the screen. And last but not least, we have our next People's Assembly on Saturday, March 27th from 2 to 4. So we want to thank everyone again for being a part of today's assembly, and we look forward in building this out and being a part of making history and changing the course of our city.